After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias.
Then a great multitude followed him because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased.
And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples.
Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near.
Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these men may eat?"
But this he said to test him, for he himself knew that he would do what he would do.
Philip answered, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little.
One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him,
There's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?
Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place. So the man sat down, the numbers about 5,000.
Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as many as they wanted.
So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost."
Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten.
Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who has come into the world." Oh, pray with me, would you please? Oh, God, thank you so much for the sweetness of fellowship with you, for the richness of being able to praise you. And now, God, for the glory in your word. And I just pray, God, for every one of us, regardless of where we've come in, you know every speck of dust under our shoes, every vapor of water in our breath, every atom that is somehow associated with our body, be it currently or falling off. And in all cases, God, you know them. You know every breath we'll take. You know, God, every tear, and you've collected them in a bottle. And I just thank you for tonight, and I pray that you would so profoundly speak fluent us tonight that every one of us would just be bowled over with you and go, wow, what a great God. For those who are familiar with this story, God, I pray that you would bring a freshness, a new depth and richness to it. But also, God, I also pray for those that this is the first time they've ever looked at these words, that it would have the impact you intend. So captivate us, draw us in. May we be just baited in our breath as we study this now and redeem every second, we pray. In Jesus' name. Amen. I would say tonight as I would any, please never just believe me, never just assume it's true because I say so. Search the scriptures. Let the Bible always be the thing you test so that, you give power to a guy and he'll always do something goofy with it. So, this beautiful blonde here, if anyone who needs pens, she's quick to hand them out. Thank you, dear. That beautiful blonde's my wife, by the way. So. It isn't like, ooh, I'm going to hand out pens next week and get a compliment. Before you think that way, Dad.
Yeah, no. No, not thinking that way anymore.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Thank you.
Okay. For those who are even vaguely familiar with Scripture, there are 4 Gospels. 4 different accounts written by 4 different individuals, if you will, about the life of Jesus. Completely and absolutely concurrent. All of them having different depths and places to come from. Matthew, and it's just hard to, there's so much to share in so little time, but I will say this. Matthew was a Jew. His Hebrew name was Levi, which means attached, like the 3rd tribe of Israel. He was a tax collector. He was somebody who had bailed on everything his culture allowed. In other words, he was a greater traitor than anyone could be. It would be worse than an American joining ISIS right after 9/11. Because it was the idea that these people, these oppressors, he was not only part of those oppressors, but he was collecting money from his own people to that. I mean, it was so horrible that he wasn't allowed to vote. If someone had done some crime to him, he was not allowed to testify in court, so he was often subject of it. But I will tell you this about Matthew. Matthew is one of the first disciples. We'll read it all the way in his own book, Matthew 9. But he was also, because he had learned, he would, as a tax collector would, he would know how to write Roman shorthand. One of the first things he had to learn. And an endless supply of writing materials. I'm under the impression that Matthew wrote much of what he saw literally while it was taking place, including, like, for instance, the Sermon on the Mount. A guy who could write as fast as someone could speak, even me, and to have the ability and the materials, the wherewithal to do so. So you have a guy, eyewitness from the get-go writing, at least from the point that we get it. Mark, our second gospel, will be a person who is what we do know is he's a cousin of Barnabas from the book of Acts. His name is actually John Mark. Mark's actually a surname, but you couldn't call him John because we have another John, that's this guy. As if that weren't confusing enough, so we call him Mark, who most believe actually interviewed Peter. So consider it like a second-hand interview of a guy who was an eyewitness. So you have somebody writing during the time, somebody interviewing secondhand. Luke, our third writer, a physician, educated as a physician would be, as actually our journalist. We read that he actually records from many sources, pulls from the material from every article or from every individual he could possibly interview and writes as a result of it. And it's the one actual gospel that he says will be linear. He calls it an orderly account. It's the one where you should know that time-wise everything is stamped because as a journalist, he puts things in linear form for us. It's the longest of the four. Then we have John. John is one of the first disciples. As a matter of fact, actually, likely one of the first two disciples Jesus would have that would be called a disciple here. And he is writing now, recollecting 60 years later. And what's so amazing is that all four of these Gospels are so perfectly interwoven that there are people that say, oh, well, they must have been written by the same source. Well, yeah, that's God. God's the one who's having that. But all written with, if you will, kind of like, for those of you who can think like a movie, the same events are taking place, but different directors are focusing on different things. So that when you read them, by the time you're done, God could have made it one very long, intricate Russian novel, if you will, but he did it in a way so that each one of them will prove points so that by the time you're done, you can conclude everything that the Old Testament promised the Messiah would be. That's the beauty of it. But John, writing as the last of the four gospel writers, 94% of what John writes is exclusive to the Gospel of John. That's very profound. Is where the other three, much of the materials, very, very similar in regards to a lot of the accounts. 94 of the stuff you read in John, you're not going to get in the other three Gospels. Now, for what it's worth in that, to give you an idea of all of the miracles recorded in all of the Gospels, roughly, if you will, 37 of them, only one, other than the resurrection, only one of them is recorded in all four of the Gospels. Did you know that? And it's not a healing of the 21 of those mentioned. It's not a deliverance from possession, though there are 5 of those mentioned in the other Gospels. Not even raising the dead like the widow's son or Jairus' daughter or Lazarus. Actually, of all of them, it's this one. This is the one miracle before the resurrection you will find in every gospel. Which tells me, by the way, that if I were to draw information from all 4 of them, I could get, in essence, the full perspective of what takes place. Does that make sense? John is focusing on something, but I'm going to give us a little bit of extra information from the others, and I'll always give you the references so you can check up on them. And here's where it is. What we have, if you remember in chapter 5, is he ran into a man who was at the pool of Bethesda, who was unable to get himself well. Jesus asked him, do you want to be well? And of course, he has all the excuses of why he wouldn't be. But in the end, Jesus says, take up your mat and walk, and he does. From there, things come heavy and hard at him from the religious people who, in essence, were the holy hall monitors, who have a real problem with Jesus doing a miracle on the Shabbat. And as a result of that, they call him a Shabbat breaker. Now, Jesus actually, and this just is so profound, is this guy is carrying a mat. The tradition, the Jewish tradition by this point had been that you could not carry a load on Shabbat, on Sabbath, and they had to decide, well, what's a load? What's heavy? Well, you have to go with the weakest guy or gal, and what would be heavy for him? And they decided it was the weight of a dried fig. So, that's a small handful of raisins, which means if you took out your false teeth on that day, it would be too heavy. And again, they're just trying to keep you from breaking. Well, what happens is they see a guy who's been sick for 38 years. Now he's up carrying his mat. Clearly his mat is going to be heavier than a dried fig. And so they say, well, why are you carrying your mat? And he said, well, the man who healed me. And they missed that whole part. The man who healed me told me to pick up my mat and walk. And they're like, wait a minute. Somebody told you to pick up your mat and walk. That's the only thing they heard in that. How about the man who healed me part? Well, that said, Jesus will spend himself then defending his witness, and that's the last part of that. And it's after that we read now that Jesus does this. But let me give you a little bit of other information from the other Gospels to kind of deepen our understanding of what would be the motivation for Jesus here. Is that fair? Now, who has their Bibles with them for the moment? Boom, that's one. That's two. Okay.
There's two right.
And there's some there.
And
Okay.
there's Gospels of John right there.
Okay, so let's do this. If you would, open up your Bible to Matthew 14 for a moment. And if you would as well, open up your Bible to Mark 6. And again, these are the same accounts of the same story, but written from the other gospel writers. Does that make sense? There's just some things. Now, I need one more Bible reader here. Someone else who wants to? Okay. Would you go to Luke, please? Luke chapter 9.
The only problem is I don't have glasses, Pastor. I'm sorry, but this is a very small. Can you read for me?
Oh, that's great. Well, then Alan will take. So you two read. You'll be accountable for one of them. So you can be
Luke 9.
You could be accountable for Luke 9, and then Alan, you could be accountable for Mark 6.
Oh,
He has.
I got it.
Mark 6 what?
I'll get you there in a moment. Here's where it starts. Matthew chapter 14, read verses 11 and 12. Who has Matthew again? I already lost that.
Oh,
Caitlin.
I had John. Matthew 14?
Matthew 14,
Okay. 11 and 12.
verses 11 and 12.
His head was brought on a platter and given to the girl who carried it to her mother. Then his disciples came, removed the corpse, buried it, and went and reported to Jesus.
Can anyone tell me whose head that is?
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist. All right. Mark chapter 6, verses 28, 29, and 30. And that's, it's Alan.
Brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard of it, they came and took away his corpse and laid it in a tomb. Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught.
So I want you to get this first. Jesus is in the middle of a ministry, and he catches this news from his disciples. John the Baptist has been murdered. Now, there's two aspects of that we want to start with here. John the Baptist is to Jesus his cousin. We know that from the Gospel of Luke. So let me ask you first of all, you lose someone you love. What do you do next? Yeah, you cry. Do any of you think this would be such a great time to go and just hang out with a bunch of people? Think of the excuses we give for ourselves being doofs. Does that make sense? You know, those times where you're like, I could be a jerk right now and people would understand it. I think I could actually just be flat out nasty. And people are like, well, I think we'll give you this one. For Jesus to lose his cousin, that's one thing. And for him to be murdered by somebody, clearly it's going to be a sore spot, because the guy who did it was Herod Antipas in the north. And later on, when they talk about him, Jesus will say, you go tell that fox. Now, the only time Jesus ever trash talks is he calls him a fox. You know, I just think that's interesting because, anyways. Of all the things Jesus could have called him, that was it. Now, we don't have foxes around here, do we? Because the thing we have here is coyotes. In England, we had foxes. They don't look that rough, but they're thieves and they're murderers. That's what they are. And I remember one day we were walking just out. I mean, one of the first things we heard when the first place we had moved to, is that there was it was love time for the foxes. And have you ever heard a fox in heat? It sounds like a possessed baby. If you could ever imagine that. It has this. It was the most bizarre thing. And we were just kind of, you lay in bed and you hear this and you're thinking someone has abandoned a baby. And it's getting eaten by a bear, I think. It was the craziest thing. But then there was within a week, we saw this cat that its guts had been strewn from one of a 4-lane street to the other side of it. The foxes are, the only reason I say that is they're really nasty things. Point is here, Jesus has learned that his cousin has been murdered. But there's one other deeper point to it. Everything that John had done preceded a season for Jesus. John emerges, as been promised by Malachi, 400 plus years before Jesus ever set foot. that there would be a messenger who would come 720 years before that Isaiah would say that a messenger would come, a voice of one crying in the wilderness. And he comes and he emerges to baptize. Jesus emerges from obscurity and is baptized. And from the beginning, Jesus is just baptizing. And then John is put in prison and Jesus begins his public ministry in a very full-scale way. And again, it launches him into the next season. Does that make sense? But when John is murdered, now everything's about the cross from this point on. The reality of Jesus' future murder is now in his crosshairs. Now, let me ask you, if you had an unpleasant dentist appointment next week, would it, we should pray for you. Does it affect you? Does it affect you if you knew? Let's go beyond that. What if you knew that one of your arms or legs were going to be amputated on Saturday? How would you feel for the rest of the week? I mean, would you feel like, don't call me right now? And I would venture to say those of you who are public media savvy would probably spend a lot of time not on social media all of a sudden. Instagram would be silent. Facebook would be maybe like life really stinks. Pray for me. Maybe that's about it. The only reason I say that is this is what Jesus is in a crash course with at this very moment. I don't want you to put yourself in that position. The disciples come to Jesus, and he's a very caring and loving individual. And with that, he knows that someone that he deeply loves has been murdered, but also now he knows that his own murder is awaiting him. That's what we're heading towards now. And at that moment, what does Jesus want to do? Well, that's the next thing. Back in Matthew 14, verse 13. And to warn you, Mark 6:31 and 32, and then Luke 9, verse 10. Okay, Matthew 14, verse 13.
When Jesus heard about it, he withdrew from there by boat to a remote place to be alone. When the crowds heard this, they followed him on foot from the towns.
Okay, stop there. Get this. Jesus hears about it. What's the first thing he does? He bails. He wants some time alone. Wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. Mark 6:31 and 32.
Then because so many people were coming and going, that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place.
Okay, so Jesus isn't going alone, is he? He's taking, and by the way, disciples is just a fancy word. It just means students. Disciple. Actually, the word in the Greek word is mathetikos. We get the word mathematics from it. The idea of it is these are learners. These are people who are learning from Jesus. They're in the school of Jesus, and as they're in the school of Jesus, this is what real discipleship looks like. By the way, it's not just sort of sitting over across from a table once a week for 40 minutes. It's living with someone and learning how to live Christian. Does that make sense? With that said, Jesus takes them. Notice he's not going to bail on those guys, even in a moment like this. But notice the situation he's in before this. He is so busy that none of them have a chance to eat. Did you notice that? I mean, they're working themselves to death when he gets this news. He doesn't stop working. He just drops the load a bit. And he says, it's time for you and I. And by the way, Jesus isn't the only one who needs to process this. Jesus is sitting with 12 individuals that he has to ready them for his death because they have no interest in him dying. Is that fair? And think about, in other words, if we're going to do the math on this and we see when this is, we've got a year in between this particular event and Jesus' death. How do I know that? Because it'll tell us that this was right before the Passover. So imagine he's like, Peter, how do I keep you from whacking off in here? And you guys, how do I, Simon the Zealot, how do I keep you from grabbing a knife and just trying to go, aggro on all of the Roman soldiers? I mean, think about a moment like that where Jesus is like, the last thing I want is for all of you to get killed in the middle of my murder. I'm going to use you in life-changing ways. So there's a lot of that going on. So he's like, you guys, we don't even have a chance to eat. We need to regroup. And I love the fact that in a moment like this, Jesus is not taking the opportunity to be selfish. He's kind of looking like, we all need to reassess this moment. But it goes beyond that. Luke 9, verses 10, just verse 10 is fine.
When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida.
Excellent. Now, what do I know about, why is that important? Why is Bethsaida? Why does it even tell us about the place? Well, I'll tell you why. John 1:44 tells us that Philip, that's one of the 12, was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Now, if you take 12, 3 out of 12, that's a quarter of the guys we know at least are from this town. And what we realize is that it's desolate, so they were small town boys. Does that make sense? However, that doesn't mean that the crowd is busy letting Jesus get away. I don't know if they're aware of John the Baptist's murder, but they have no interest in letting Jesus get alone. For instance, I'll show you. Matthew 14, verse 13, and Mark 6, verse 33.
Verse 13?
Yes.
Okay. When Jesus heard about it, he withdrew from there by boat to a remote place to be alone. When the crowds heard this, they followed him on foot from the towns.
Mark 6:33.
But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them.
Okay, so let me do this. Flip around, if you will, to the back. I don't know if visuals are helpful, but they are for me. We're going to spend more time on this in a bit, but I'd like to show you. This is the Sea of Galilee. It comes by 4 names. So try these with me. The Sea of Gennesaret. That's maybe the hardest. Gennesaret. 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 The Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Tiberias, and that's what John will tell us. Now, Gennesaret and Gennesaret are the same word. It's just a different language. Gennesaret is Hebrew. Gennesaret is Greek. What does the word mean? Let me show you. I'll be right back. It means harp. I'd like you to look at this, and then I'd like you to look at the shape of the sea. The reason they name it that is because its shape. Now, for what it's worth, a traditional Hebrew harp has 22 strings. Does anyone know why it has 22 strings?
Sharps and flats, and then 8.
Wouldn't it be? No, but we're actually not in equal temperament of 12 tone as we would have here.
Half a piano.
Well, that would be nice. It would definitely make life a little easier for us pianists. Because there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Which means you could literally play a psalm. Because every letter is a note.
Do people do that?
People do that. For what it's worth. Now, let me tell you, and we'll develop this a little bit, but I want you to realize, can you find on this Capernaum? If it were a clock, where would that be roughly?
12?
Yeah.
Ish?
Yeah, it's kind of between 11 and 12. That's fair. Where is Bethsaida?
1.
Yeah, so you guys can find that, right? Yeah. So imagine Jesus is somewhere near Capernaum. And from there, he has to go to Bethsaida. Why would you take a boat? Well, that's the one place you could sure get away a little bit. But can you see how the people see him on the boat? And from there, they just run on the land and meet him to the other side. Now, Jesus, all he's trying to get is a little bit of quiet and peace. Is that fair? But he's not getting that, is he? So what does he do? What would you do at a moment like that if you had absolute power? Would you freeze time? Somehow, that's one of my first thoughts, is if I could just freeze time for a moment and kind of, I need to slow this down because I don't want to make a mistake. Here's the difference. Jesus had such the prayer life that he could get blindsided by the obvious. Sooner or later it was going to happen. And he was already ready. You ever have times where if you've ever played a sport professionally or even intensely, you just wish that you had brought your A game when you showed up on the field, in the court? If you're a musician, you kind of just wish that you maybe had practiced a little bit before you went out there. You'd have been so much more ready. And you're like, it'll play out. And then something happens and you realize at that moment, you're just not really ready to carry it like you could have. Well, that's the point here. But Jesus is ready. Okay, so how does he respond? Let me show you how he responds, by the way. Matthew 14:14, Mark 6:34, Luke 9:11.
As he stepped ashore, he saw a huge crowd, felt compassion for them, and he healed their sick.
When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things.
Luke 9:11.
Yes.
But the crowds learned about it and followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing.
Okay, according to this text, he did 3 things when he saw the crowd. The first one was exclusive to Luke. What was the first thing he did with the crowd when he saw them? Even before that. What's that?
Yeah, compassion.
Yeah, he had compassion and he welcomed them. He received them.
I don't know, that was
Actually, well, okay, it was both then. It was Mark and Luke because it's in Luke. Okay, so he welcomed them. He received them. And then what else did he do? What were the other 2 things?
He healed them.
He healed them. And what else? And he taught them. Would you do that? We should thank God we're not God. You know what I mean? I'd be like, oh, y'all gonna have to wait.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I'll tell you what. I'll make sure that no one dies, and in 2 days we'll come back and we'll deal with this situation. Jesus, by the way, and what motivated him? What was his motivation to this, according to this? Yeah, according to this, compassion. He was moved by compassion. I want to be like him. Do you want to be like him? Because it wasn't just that he felt compassion, it moved him. It made him do something. All right, here's one of my favorite Greek words. The word for compassion is the word splagnas. Try that one. Splagnas. Isn't that just a great word? It literally means to have soft bowels. Yeah. You go, what? How is that? You ever see a picture or something where it just, everything inside of you hurts? You kind of feel it. And then what happens is it gets abused. People use that and they just overuse it, and then you kind of harden your inside so you don't feel it anymore, just so you don't go crazy. At the bus stops in London, there was a picture of, it was a picture of a boy in a wheelchair. And it said, go ahead and walk away. Johnny wishes he could.
No.
Oh,
And I remember the first time I saw it, I literally went, ah! I wonder what Johnny feels about being in the picture. And I wonder if Johnny that is actually his chair, or they just found a kid. And it was like, you just get to this point where you're just like, I'm going to go crazy if I just keep. And the idea of this is Jesus' insides were so soft to the needs of people that it moved him to action. I mean, we can agree, someone's like, yeah, you're in a hard way. Wow, it stinks to be you. That's awful. But man, Jesus is moved to do something about it. So what does he do? First of all, he receives them. If I'm not moved with compassion, I definitely would not receive them. I would be like, I'll tolerate. And tolerate's kind of is the 0 of receiving being the plus, if that makes sense. But what about his disciples? How do they respond? Well, and by the way, Jesus doesn't just do that. He heals them. He takes a look at every person who's followed him because they're like, hey, I've got a sick grandpa, I've got my sick. I mean, they see Jesus and they're like, oh my goodness, I never got to actually get to him, and my wife's dying, and I'm going to carry her. And I can see Jesus looking and going, you know what? I don't blame you. You know, you still have somebody you love that's dying, or you're dying, and you want that changed. I'm so thankful there's just never a time where Jesus is like, nah, now is not the time for that. You with me so far? Mm-hmm. Here's the best part. His students have a lot to learn. So what do? Matthew 14:15, Mark 6:35. And we'll go from 6:35 all the way, if you will, to 6:37. And then Luke 9:12.
When evening came, the disciples approached him and said, this place is a wilderness, and it is already late. Send the crowds away so they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves.
Mark 6:35 through 37.
By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered, you give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we going to spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?
Luke 9:12.
Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we're in a remote place here.
Now, we can give them a little bit of credit. They are the one guys in the know that Jesus is dealing with the death of John the Baptist. Is that fair? And they are too. They are. I mean, to be honest, at least 2 of them were John the Baptist's disciples before they graduated to the graduate school of Jesus. We know that because that's in John chapter 1. Likely John, the writer of this, is one of them. And so you can see them going, well, you know, they're really going to get hungry. They should be really hungry by now. Jesus, dismiss church, will you? Get them out of here so they can go get food. I'm sure by this point Chick-fil-A is still open. You know, you can get yourself something, a good salad. So, I mean, they realize that it can sound really tender, right? You know what's interesting? The 2 things that the disciples do the most recorded in Scripture is send people away or try to get in the way of them coming to Jesus and argue over who would be greatest. Doesn't that just make you feel comfortable to recognize Jesus doesn't have a problem with those people getting into his school, if you will? They can't graduate that way, but he'll let you in. So I'm like, okay, well, there's probably room for me in all of this. So let's wrap. Now, obviously, we have some text to get through, and we won't develop a lot, but there's stuff to write down in this. But I wanted us to start with this, and it's for fair reason. So this is what we have. Jesus is somewhere roughly 10, 11, 1 o'clock, or 10, 11, 12 o'clock on the west side. He learns about his cousin being murdered by Herod Antipas. So he's going to take his boys and go, guys, we need to get away. So off they go. And by the way, remember, there's a fishing business. 4 of them are in a fishing business. And so they have boats, and they hop in the boats, and off they go. But as they're going, and Jesus is trying to get his boys away, everyone else kind of looks and goes, oh, there they are on the boats. Hey, we can outrun them. And they all run with their, and these are sick people and people carrying sick people, and they're all rushing over. And Jesus gets to the other side, and he sees them, and there has to be this radical contrast, because you got a bunch of guys going, oh, are you kidding me? Wouldn't you? If you're one of the disciples. I mean, you've been more than 9 to 5 with Jesus here, and it's like, oh, we finally get a little bit of him to ourselves. What's amazing is we actually can get Jesus to ourselves, and we don't. These guys just want it, and they look, and they're all there, and start crowding. Oh, you believe this? But Jesus on the other is like, oh no, but a different kind of oh no. I'm like, oh man, these people need help. And I love the fact that if that was any one of us, Jesus would have never turned us away. And he looks, he receives them, he heals them, but he also teaches them. Now, you're with me on all of that. Now, if it tells us here, for what it's worth, that the Passover is near, and I'm doing the math on all of this, this is 31 AD. This will be a day that you'll want to remember. It is April 25th, 31 AD. This Passover is my wife's birthday. Now you have time to save up for it. All right. Now let me develop just a bit here. Verse 1. Now flip it over, because there's a little few things. There's some characters I want to point out in this. We want to kind of take a good look at. But it says, after these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Stop. Why does John say it this way? Because for John, he was raised, I remind you, this was his workplace. This was where he was born and raised. And for him, it was the Sea of Galilee. Galilee is the region for which this sits. We might say the county. That makes sense. Say postcode in England, but it's the idea. It's the area of Galilee. It's known for being uneducated. It's known for being kind of hick, is kind of the idea. It was known for being quiet, intimate, sweet. To this day, all that northern tip, it's my happy place. It genuinely is. Of all the places, when everything gets crazy, Suzanne knows. She's like, if there's some place she would send me for me to come back nicer, Galilee is the place. It's hot, but it's quiet. It is so, and it's the one place I get up before the sun rises every day when we're there. And by the way, side little plug, we are looking at taking a trip to Israel, doing an Israel tour, just in case you're interested. It gets so quiet before the sun rises that you can hear the wind under a mud duck when it flies by. And it's the best time to get just quiet and go, God, how are we? God bless you. I mean that word for word. It's a place where you can kind of be like, all right, I want to get quiet. I've quieted my heart before you. Am I missing something? There's something not right in our relationship. I just want to make sure before I go on beyond this. And what was interesting is that one of those multi-million-dollar television ministries, 3 of them actually, got together and they wanted to build a thing called Bible Land there, a theme park in all the places. I'm like, it's the only time I've ever contemplated arson. And I prayed. They were actually, I kid you not, going to build a glass pier so you could walk on and get your picture taken to make it look like you're walking on water. I kid you not. And I was like, no! It never happened. Thank you, Jesus. Again, God is alive. I just wanted to make that clear. But I kind of wanted to just kind of give you a little bit of a rough estimate for some things for what it's worth. It's roughly 13 miles long and roughly 8 miles wide. Give you an idea. That's the size of the harp. And on a clear day, you can see to the other side. You can actually see from those areas. You can see just about anything but the southern tip. And there's millions of other things, but for the perspective of this, the crowd seeing Jesus on a boat is not a weird thing. It's a very common thing there. You're with me on that? Now, for what it's worth, it's roughly 4 trillion liters of water that's sitting in that sea. And it was, until just recently, about 70% of the drinking water for all of Israel. They have desalination plants and so forth. So I wanted to at least point that out. But here's the interesting thing. Rome only built one city on the western side, which you can see. And that one city, the one major city, and that one major city was named after the Caesar, and that's Tiberias. Can you see that on the south there? It is the one loud and raucous place to this day. I mean, it's raucous kind of like Hermosa Beach is raucous. That kind of makes sense. You know? It's the one place where at night when you're trying to get to something, you hear from about 12 cars competing over the right? And so you can go there, and it's kind of a nice place for a meal. But when you want quiet, you won't go to Tiberias for it. It was condemned by the rabbis of the day because it was built on a graveyard. That's kind of a non-kosher. It's kind of a Jewish no-no. It was also named after a Roman Caesar. That's kind of a no-no. And it was a pagan city. That's kind of 3 strikes. They condemned the place, and they said no good Jew would ever go there. You're with me on that? So I'd like you to consider the fact that when John writes in verse 1 here, it's the Sea of Galilee, but he has to tell the people he's writing to, because I remind you it's much later now, after the destruction of the temple. He's like, you guys need to realize, the Sea of Galilee, that's what I call it. It's the Sea of Tiberias, that's how you're going to know it. It'd be like people back before New York, when it was New Amsterdam, going, oh, I remember New Amsterdam. Oh, I'm sorry, New York, because we changed the name. That kind of idea. And the only reason I say that is it becomes really thematic for all of this, that which was sweet and intimate, and I love this, but it makes me so sad, that which was sweet and intimate and sincere now has become just raucous and superficial and cheap. And we're going to find that's kind of be thematic for all of this. Okay, verse 2 it says, notice that the great multitude followed him because they saw the signs of which he performed on those that were diseased. Notice, by the way, they were in essence, if you will, holy ambulance chasers. They were people who really came there because let me say it this way. And here's our first entity, if you will, our first character in this, as you kind of have it in our text here. Our first character is the crowd. And the crowd has come to take. And what we're going to find is, by the end of the chapter, it's going to become evident it's the only thing they're looking for. At least a lot of them. Nobody's of this group, you're not going to find them really looking for a relationship with Jesus or even to listen. They just want to get. Please don't be part of that group. And we can start there. We come to God because we don't want our girlfriend pregnant, we don't want to have a disease, we don't want a warrant out for arrest, we think we might have a life-threatening illness, our life's just rough and we hate it. And we kind of come to him, but in the end of it all Jesus is kind of the thing to just kind of be the great garbage collector. I've learned this. The moment that the worst thing God could do in a situation like that is remove everything, because if he did, you wouldn't go see him again. And what he really wants is a relationship. And if you're like, God, if you heal me, I won't bother you anymore. And you can see God going, well, then why would I want to heal you? All I want is a relationship with you. Well, there's our first group. Does that make sense? Character 1, that's the crowd, and the crowd's just a batch of takers at the moment. Verse 3, Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Very fundamental, but it's an easily missed thing because it's a cultural thing. Traditionally, when a teacher teaches, he sits and his students stand. Now, the only reason I say that is we'll see the same thing in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. Jesus will sit, we read, and his disciples come to him. Now, the only reason I say that is when Jesus is sitting, they know that he's got something to teach. And as they know he's got something to teach, there's a group of people who want to come close enough to listen. But there's another group of people that are like, oh, time off now, I don't need it now. Does that make sense? I find this happening in the church. It's sort of like we can show up, and if I can have a spiritual experience, if I can get the holy shakes and hoots and the hollers and the woo, and if I can feel like a chicken or a sprinter, and I've been through all of that, watched it all, the warrior spirit where people were slapping each other, and the people where they're, I'm too drunk in the spirit and I'm going to barf on you. I've seen all this kind of wacky stuff, but the moment the Bible gets open, people are like, all right, I'm going to go get a coffee. I'm like, interesting. And it just reminds me of the crowd. Because there's a crowd that when Jesus sits down, they're still going to be out in the mass somewhere. That doesn't mean he's going to avoid them or neglect them, but all of a sudden there's this division between them and his students. Does that make sense? And he sits down and his disciples come, and what we find is he sits down and his disciples are still with him here. And then it says in verse 4 that the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. That tells me where we're looking. We're now at the end of April, 31 AD. And with that, I recognize that this story has to revolve around the Passover, the first of the 3 required feasts of the year, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. In this particular feast, we have the unleavened bread, we have the driving out of the chametz, that is the driving out of the leaven. You have no leaven or yeast in your house. You make sure that the wine is mixed, you make sure that the light is prepared, you make sure that the bread is made. All of these things are all preparations for the Passover. Does that kind of make sense? By the way, we are going to have a Passover here, God willing, and it's gonna be cool and funky, and if you're even crazy enough, we might even give you costumes to put on just for the evening. Just to kind of get the feel of it. But it's important to recognize, hear me on this, John, who is Jewish, I remind you, is setting this whole thing up just like a traditional Hebrew service. You prepare the lights, and then you prepare the wine, and then you drive out the chametz. You drive out the leaven, and then from there you start inviting guests. And as you start, because you can't do that until your house is prepared, and then as you invite the guests, you make sure that the water is there for the achatz, for the washing, and then you prepare the bread. Why is that important? Chapter 1, that light has come into the world. That's chapter 1 of John. Chapter 2, Jesus turns water into wine, and then he drives the money changers out of the temple. What is he doing? He's driving out the leaven, the echatz. Chapters 3 and 4, that's the woman at the well, and that's Nicodemus. That's inviting the guests. And then from that, he turns and he makes bread here. Do you see all of that? Every bit of that lines up with exactly how you would prepare for the most important Passover, which will start us in chapter 13. From chapter 13 through 19, that's actually just the Passover week, for what it's worth. Okay, with that in mind, he sets us up here. Verse 5 says, Jesus lifted his eyes, and seeing the great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip. And here's our second character, Philip. Now, notice it says he lifted his eyes. Do you see that? That means it must be now. He's up on a mountain, I remind you, that we read that earlier. And he looks up. And he looks up at Philip. Who's he? If that means he's looking lower than Philip at the moment, what's he looking down at? It appears to me that he's looking at the crowd. And he looks and he says to Philip. So notice it's like who, what, where, when, how. What's the question here? Which one of those is it? Where? Don't miss the where. Where? Stop. Where's your question? The reason we are gravitating to this story, quite honestly, often is what we have are very insufficient, insignificant means for a completely impossible need in front of us. Does that sound fair? So think about that in your own life for a moment. What is the seemingly impossible need? What is it that there's just no way I am enough for this. And my question to you is, so where? Where are you going to go when you don't have enough, when you're not enough? Is that fair? Mm-hmm. Now, he asks one guy, he gets two answers. Philip's our first. What do I know about Philip? He's from Bethsaida. I remind you, John 1:44. So this is his home. He's a homeboy here. He's an OG here. With that, we only read about him here, and I think John 12 and 14. Philip is the problem solver. He's the guy that gets it done. There's nothing wrong with a guy like that. You like people like that, don't you? Especially when they're on your side.
Yes, of course.
So Jesus looks at him and he's like, so where are we going to go for this? Now, Philip's answer, don't miss this, is he kind of goes and goes, I'm so glad you asked. I've already done the math on this one. 200 days' wages. That's what a denarii is, is a day's wage. He goes, it's going to cost us about 200 days' wages. Now, does anyone know who the bank was among the group? Who carried the purse? Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot was the guy you came to actually carried the funds. We also know that we'll read later, spoiler alert, he skimmed off the top. He was extorting. So the guy was never a full-on disciple that one day just got misguided. And it's like, oh no, all of a sudden I was loving Jesus and then Satan just came up and bopped me in the head. And now look at, no, he was always a thief. But he doesn't go to Judas. He goes, if you will, to the accountant, right? He goes to the fix-it, the get-her-done guy. Where are we going to go? Now, Jesus already has raised the dead. He's healed the sick. He's done unimaginable miracles. He's turned water to wine. So where are we going to go? And he's like, you know what I've noticed? And this is the interesting thing about Philip. Philip focuses on what they don't have. He focuses on the shortfall. And by the way, you're probably aware of the fact that Philip's really not going to be much of a hero in the story. As a matter of fact, that's kind of the end of Philip's story on this. So he looks at Philip. Where do we want to go? Now, interesting, is that you? What happens when you spend all your time focusing on your shortfall? Man, it just doesn't make anything any better. It's like the world gets smaller, doesn't it? And what happens is, imagine maybe, and we don't have record, but maybe what if Philip was the one who's like, we should really send these people away? You know, because Judas, how much you got in there? You got enough for this? And if you do, is this going to clean us out? You know, wouldn't it just be kind to let them all go home now? Let's just send them home because, dude, we can't take this kind of hit right here. I mean, it just seems like not only is it good for them, it's going to be good for us. Does that make sense? I mean, that seems fair. And Jesus goes, where? And he goes, nowhere. Notice he doesn't answer that question. Where are we going to go to get this bread? And he's like, we don't have the resources to go anywhere. Is that fair? Verse 7, Philip answered, 200 denarii worth of bread's not sufficient for everyone just to have a nibble. That's not going to make them full, just enough to get them on their way. Verse 8, now one of his disciples, Jesus' disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, has a different answer now. You know what he focuses on? What they do have. Now, what do I know about Andrew? Andrew is the inviter. I like this about Andrew. I love people like this. I'm one of these people, I warn you, it drives my wife crazy sometimes because I'm always a more the merrier. She's like, what do you think about having a little whatever? And I'm like, yeah, you know, we could invite. And she's like, what part of little did you miss? I'm like, well, I think my little's different than your little, right? But he was the one who invites Peter, to be honest, in John 1:41. He's the one who will bring children, as we see here. And then the Greeks will come. Interesting, these two guys seem to have some kind of relationship. Greeks show up, by the way, for what it's worth in John 12, they show up and they speak to Philip. Remember, he's the get-her-done guy. And they say, hey, we want to see Jesus. You know who Philip goes to? He goes to Andrew and he goes, hey, Andrew, they want to go see. It's like, hey, you're the guy that gets, you handle you're the welcoming committee, right? You're the guy that gives hugs at the door. So he's the inviter. And so Andrew then turns to Jesus and goes, there's a lad here, which makes me think he's Scottish. There's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many? Now, does that not sound like the dumbest thing someone could say? No, not us, because we're Christian and we've got our good Christian outfits on the moment, and we just know, yeah, it seems like a really good thing. Well, come on now. Now, first of all, barley loaves are a biscuit. They're just a biscuit. The fish, there's two different kinds of fish. The large fish, for instance, that Peter will pull in John 21, spoiler alert, is the word ichthus. Some of you are familiar with that word because when we have the Christian fish, ichthus, that's the word for that. It's a larger fish. And the reason for that is every letter represents something. And it's like Jesus, that's the Jesus, the I, ik, and then the Christos, that's the chi, and then the theta, theos, that's God, kleos is Son, and then cetera, Savior. So it's Jesus Christ, God, Son, Savior. The whole thing was because the word fish spelled those things with that acronym. That's why they used that fish in the first place. It wasn't just fairly easy to make in the sand with two little swerves. That's a big fish, but that's not the word used here. This is the word that's used for somebody's lunch, like a sardine. And matter of fact, the fish that were used were small enough that you could eat their bones. That tells you something. So they were the size, basically, of your finger. So what you have is he's got two of these, and they're salted to be preserved. And there's 5 biscuits. Now what we do read is that there's 5,000 men and their families. So 10, 15,000 people. And he looks and he goes, now, by the way, what's the lad's name? No, we actually were never told. In any of the Gospels, we're never told the boy's name. In other words, it must not be actually about him. If it was about him, God would have spent more time on him, won't you think? But instead, what we have are 2 characters. We have one guy who looks and goes, there's no way this is going to work out. And there's another one who goes, well, this is kind of a way, but it just doesn't make sense yet. Does that make sense? So, well, we got this. This is what we got. Interesting. How many loaves are there? 5. Isn't that the whole point of last chapter? Remember the guy that was on one of the 5 porches and Jesus giving the 5 testimonies? Anyways, so notice what Jesus says in verse 10. And could you sense the delight in Jesus at this moment where he's like, hey, there's this. Now, I wonder if the kid was like, hey, that's my lunch. You know, he's like, well, we're bigger than him. We could probably, Peter, just tell me that. We don't read anywhere any reservation. We don't know anything about the kid other than he had a lunch. Someday in heaven, imagine you being that kid and you walk up to the kids like, hey, I was the kid with the lunch. You know, that was my lunch. And everybody. You know. Because the point really isn't the kid, it's Jesus. Notice his commands first. Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down in the number about 5,000, and Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the people, to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise the fish, as much as they wanted. Okay, we're almost done. Last couple things here to close this up. According to the other Gospels, what we'll read is Jesus blesses the loaves, then he breaks the loaves, and then he hands out the loaves. And what if you say, like, I'm not enough. I'll never be enough. Yeah, good. You in and of yourself, you're not enough. I'm not enough. I don't have to be. But I want to warn you, Jesus will bless you. He'll break you. But he'll do it to hand you out. And all of a sudden, what you'll find is, you'll be more than enough. Well, as long as you're in his hands. But here's his simple command. Bring them to me. God, I'm not enough. Bring you to me. This isn't enough. I won't have enough. Bring it to me. Trust me with it. Will you put it in my hands? Now, where does the miracle take place? It doesn't say. And I've learned, because usually what that means is that's room for theologians to write books to make money. But traditionally, that means God gives space so that no matter what side you lean to, it's still within the boundaries of Scripture. Does that make sense? Did it happen that Jesus just kept lifting up, breaking it, and then lifted up and breaking it? Or did it be that they kind of carried a basket, and as they were carrying the basket, they just kept growing? Or as people pulled out loaves, more loaves kept popping, up there? We don't even know where it was happening. All we know is that 10, 15,000 people or so are sitting down, and the average family was 4 to 6 kids. I mean, Jesus himself at least had a 6-pack of siblings. I mean, so you start doing that math, and now you're looking at 20, 30,000 people. And you've got a group of disciples. I mean, how many trips up the hill do you take? But I mean, would it be the coolest thing for you? For me, it'd be the coolest thing for about 5 minutes. I know, it's cool, and they'll come back, oh, there's some more, and there's cool, some more. Or did they just keep staying full? We don't really know. All we know is he distributed them, gave them to those sitting down. Somewhere in all of that, everyone got fed. Now, don't miss this. Do you see the word wanted there in verse 11? As much as they wanted. I'm going to give you one last Greek word. I think it'll be second to last Greek word. The word for wanted is the word thelos. Can you say thelos?
Thelos.
It means to want, to take pleasure in. Is that fair? But it is mostly translated will. When we read the will of God, God, what is your will? You know what's amazing? How many times we play that off like God's got some special secret plan, and if we can't figure it out, God's going to bop us in the head? Like, how goofy is that? Would you do that to your own kids? Hey, I have a special plan for you today, and if you don't figure it out, I'm going to beat you. What kind of sick relationship is that? But we play that game with God. We're like, God, what do I do today? Do I wear this shirt or that shirt, or do I drive to this coffee place, or do I go to this Starbucks or that Starbucks? Or it's amazing the kind of weird decisions we make versus kind of going, what would please you today? Because you know what's interesting? We would spend less time freaking out over choices that are less significant and be more concerned about the things that we know actually hurt him. We could live in complete rebellion to him, but actually ask God, what's your will on which job I should take? And God's like, your job is less important than where your heart is with me. If my wife were like, I'm debating between two jobs, but neither one of them is going to take her away from me, well, I'm not going to be concerned about that as much as, well, if I take this job, I'm never going to see you again. Well, I don't think you should take that job. Does that make sense? I just want to free you, because the moment that became clear to me, my whole life blossomed. It's like, God, I just want to please you. What would please you today? And that's the words there. So what happens? They ate to where literally they were glutted. That's verse 12. So when they were filled. That word, by the way, is the idea. You ever eat at one of those Italian restaurants? You know what they say is, you eat at a good Italian restaurant, you're hungry in like 3-4 months, and you have to like secretly unbutton your top button, and you thank God for those new jeans that are all stretchy and all that, and you're like, I'm glad I don't tuck at the moment. You're like, oh, I'm so happily miserable. It was the first sentences that the first thing I learned in Italian. Io sono molto grosso, ma sono molto felice. I am very fat, but I am very happy. And the only reason I say this is that's where all these people were. They didn't just get that nibble. I remind you, that was the guy who looked at what they didn't have, and he's like, man, we're not going to give him a nibble. The other guy's like, well, we got a lunch here for a kid, but what are you going to do with it? And Jesus like, just bring it to me. And now you've got everybody glutted. Verse 13. Therefore they gathered them up. They filled the 12 baskets with the fragments of the barley loaves that were left over by those who had eaten. Notice, by the way, for what it's worth, he wanted to make sure that that none of it was wasted. And 12 baskets are really fundamental. There's two different, I remember I said there'd be one other word. The word here for what it's worth is kafinos. Kafinos is a word that means a small picnic basket, it's the idea. And it's like they had 12 of them. By the way, I find that interesting because we do know that Jesus had 12 disciples. But what about Jesus? Do you find it interesting? Gathered around because we need 13 of these things. He doesn't carry one for himself. It just wasn't his issue. By the way, did you notice also that it was the loaves left over here? And it wasn't the fish left over. Jesus like, we ain't taking that on the boat. So how did the people respond? Verse 14. Last thing we can bring this around to close. When those men, when they had seen the sign, saw what Jesus did, they said, truly, this is the prophet who had come into the world. Interesting. Because in Deuteronomy 18, the prophet was what was prophesied by Moses when he said that the Lord will raise up a prophet like me. Him you must hear. And they're like, well, do something Moses-like then. How about giving them bread to eat? That was something that was unique to Moses. And what, by the way, that's going to become the whole point of the next week. The people will belly up next and go, the problem with eating bread is you get hungry again. I wonder what would happen if any of these people were celiac. Well, I guess I'll have fish. So anyways. The whole point here on all of this, first of all, on all of this, is that the Lord wants you to recognize tonight that what you deem as insignificant will never be insufficient if it's put in his hands, even in the face of the impossible. That's the good news. Secondly, on all of this, that Jesus was always there to field the need, even when we would never have done so. And the more we make Jesus like us, the more we rip him off of being awesome. Is that fair? Or dare I even say awful? I don't know how that got bad. Like some awe is good, but if you're full of it, it's really bad. No, he's awful in the very best of ways. But also I recognize in all of this that Jesus is going to tend to your basic needs just as much as your other needs. He took care of every ill person. He taught and discipled people so they could mature in their faith. He also made sure they were fed. He took care of every need. He is a full service Savior. So as we bring this to close, and what we're going to find is that the people are going to be less interested in a Savior and more interested in a Denny's. They just want Jesus to hook them up with food all the time, and that's all they want. And here is the danger, beloved. I remind you, 3 characters. The first, those that just came to take. The problem is when you come to take, if Jesus gives you the very thing you're seeking, and all you've done is come to take, you'll just show up tomorrow with a new list of things to take. And that is a horrible relationship for anyone. Would you want anyone liking you like that? Now that you've given me everything that I need today, I've got a new list tomorrow for you to give me. After a while, that would get really old, wouldn't it? But I'd like to recognize in this that Jesus still took care of them anyways. And he wants them to graduate out of this. And by the way, the biggest backslide, or if you will, the biggest departure, the biggest dropout of the school of Jesus is going to happen in this chapter. And what, by the way, this mass that's following him, Jesus is going to lay it on the line. Spoiler alert. And you're going to have the largest dropout you've ever seen in the school of Jesus. And for what it's worth, just to give you a hint, it's John 6:66. For what it's worth, to consider. But also in this, let me say as we go to prayer, that no part of this miracle is inconsequential. And somewhere in all of it, if you're willing to hand it to him, you're going to be part of it. So you could be the Philip that's like, here are all the things that I don't have, but you're so busy focusing on that, you'll never bring it to Jesus. You say, oh, these are all the things I need. These are all the things I need. But on the other side, you're like, this is what I have. Can I give it to you? And could you do really cool things with it? I've learned he meets needs before I even know I need them when he does that. Have you noticed that? Now, this same Jesus will take the greatest need for every one of us, our guilt. It's the one thing we are not equipped to pay without help. And he would, out of great love for us, take your bill and my bill upon himself and die on the cross to pay for it. How do I know it was enough? Because he rose from the grave just as the Bible promised. Now, please hear me on this. If you've accepted Jesus Christ, I recognize that the hardest part is to embrace the resurrection. See, God is not a God of nots. He's a God of insteadofs. And when you hand him that you let him let die only brings a resurrection of something better. That's the good news I found. I hand him things and I'm like, oh, I know this isn't right. This doesn't reconcile with you. I give it to you. And God says, well, I'm glad we can get that out of you because I got something better to put inside of you. He took my lust and he replaced it with love. He took my violence and he replaced it with compassion. It is amazing how that happens. But I've learned if your hands are full, there's no place to put anything. So if you have accepted Christ, I want you to recognize that God, in everything you give him, that which is usable, God will use and bless and break and distribute. For that which should just be left to die, he will let die and give you something better for it. That's the good news in all of it. But if you haven't accepted Jesus, let me just say this as we pray. That prayer, that's up to you. And it's simple. He's paid your bill, but he still wants your permission. Because in the end, choice is a dignity granted. He's like, hey, do you make that choice or you don't? But if you say no to him, then don't blame him. I invited you into my house. He's like, no, I'm not going to go to the house. You suck. Well, then in the end of it all, then don't blame me if you're not a part of the house. You don't get the benefits of the household. But the bill's been paid. The love has been granted. It's all been issued. You're like, but I'm too filthy. I'm too whatever. Compared to who? These people? When at any given moment this was a right moment for Jesus to turn someone away and yet he didn't, do you think he'd turn you away? He's already paid for your sins. The question is whether you're willing to accept that. So as we pray now, if you're a Christian tonight, and by the way, that means you've accepted that gift, well then the good news is rejoice. And maybe right now there's something you're battling about letting go. You're like, I don't know. I like this. I know it doesn't reconcile. Man, just let it go tonight. Or maybe you feel like there's something so insufficient God couldn't possibly use it, but that you realize it's still a good thing. Man, put it in his hands tonight and watch what happens. Will you pray with me? God, I thank you so much. And I recognize that there's a crowd that's come to take. There's a man who only focuses on what they really don't have. And there's a man who recognizes, however meager, that placed in your hands, that with man what is impossible, with you nothing is impossible. So first I want to pray for the Christians in this room, myself included. I pray, God, tonight, that if there's anything we're fighting you over, remind us that the death is half the story, the resurrection's the other. And if we're afraid of watching something die, then we're not embracing by faith what you could give us on the other side of that. So let us be willing to hand you anything and everything, recognizing, Lord, that if it needs to be laid to rest, then lay it to rest. But Lord, for those things that we are so overwhelmed by, we're fearful of, and Lord, we recognize fear can motivate us to do very selfish, very careless things. And yet, God, by faith, we trust you. That doesn't mean we're just going to sit and do nothing. In this case, that means giving you the little we have and putting it in your hands and letting you do with it as you wish. And we want to start there. I'm going to say, God, tonight, I don't want to fight you anymore. I'm going to hand this to you, and I don't want to be afraid of what will happen. I'm just going to trust you. But while our eyes are closed, while our heads are bowed, if there's anyone, maybe you're not sure you've ever accepted this gift, for every one of us here that's a Christian, it all began the same way. We openly accepted that gift of Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection to give us new life. And if that's you tonight, may your heart's racing or whatever, if you feel singled out, I don't know who you are, he does. The problem you have is with him. Why not surrender? Just like as Christians right now are debating and seeking to let go and fight God no more on these things. Man, don't fight God when he's trying to love you. He's paid your bill. Don't be too proud to not take that. The Bible says if we're willing to confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in our heart that God raised him from the dead, we'll be saved. And if that's you right now, just pray this prayer with me. And if you're a Christian and you just want to renew that vow tonight, pray this prayer with me. God in heaven, I come to you as a sinner, recognizing you love sinners. I stand before you in my own merit, guilty. But I believe that you paid my price on the cross of your only begotten Son, Jesus the Christ, who died for my sin, guilt, and shame, and rose again, just as your scripture promised. So, if you want to pay my bill, I say yes. Say yes to your saving me, redeeming me, and I confess Jesus now as the Lord of my life. Take this shambles I've made of my life and make it yours. I put it in your hands now. In Jesus' name. Amen.